Marina was always the kind of person who would do anything for others. At work, she was the first to arrive and the last to leave. She wrote reports that weren't even hers, covered for colleagues' lateness, and even smiled when the boss praised the team without mentioning her name. On the outside, she seemed content. On the inside, she felt a growing emptiness, a sense that no matter how hard she tried, no one really saw what she was doing. People used to say she was essential, but it only took her a week off to realize how fragile that word was. That week, no one called to ask if everything was all right. No one noticed the difference. Emails were answered, tasks continued, and the machine kept turning as if it had never existed. It was in this absence that something began to stir within her, a mixture of rebellion and awakening. Am I really that replaceable? She thought. But deep down, the real question was, why did I accept becoming someone easy to replace? The truth is that for years, Marina lived in fear of displeasing others. The fear of being seen as difficult, selfish, or insubordinate kept her silent, and each time she fell silent, she lost a little more of herself. On Sunday night, before returning to work, she looked in the mirror and barely recognized herself. That tired woman with dark circles under her eyes and a dimmed sparkle seemed like a distorted version of who she once was. She remembered when she started, full of dreams, with her head held high and the certainty that she would make a difference. But over time, she gave way, retreated, diminished her own worth to fit the expectations of others. That night, she cried, but it was a different kind of cry, not of sadness, but of realization. She understood that the world only saw her as she presented herself to be. The next day, when she arrived at the office, something about her had changed. It wasn't arrogance, it was presence. He greeted everyone, but not with his automatic smile. He spoke calmly, without rushing, and when her boss asked her to prepare a last-minute report, which wasn't even in her area of expertise, she simply replied, "Not today. I have my priorities." The silence that followed was almost palpable. People looked at her as if she had committed a sin, but deep down, Marina felt a lightness she hadn't felt in a long time. That simple phrase, "not today," sounded like a cry for freedom. At lunchtime, a colleague came to comment, "You're different, more confident. You even seem like a different person." Marina smiled, this time for real. Maybe I'm finally remembering who I am. But this type of change never goes unnoticed. At the end of the day, the boss called her into his office and said, "I've noticed that you've been less collaborative lately." She took a deep breath and replied, "No, I'm still collaborating. I just stopped erasing myself." It was the first time he didn't know what to say. At that moment, Marina realized the problem had never been the recognition from others. That was how much she had forgotten to recognize herself. And for the first time in a long time, she felt pride, not for what she had done, but for who she was becoming. In the following days, Marina felt the weight of every passing glance, every silence in hallway conversations. People started whispering, "He thinks he's all that now. Since she took her vacation, she's come back a different person. Let's see how long it lasts." But she wasn't fazed. For the first time, she understood that being true to herself was more important than being accepted by others. And, interestingly, the more authentic she appeared, the more uncomfortable the atmosphere became. One day, her boss asked her to review another employee's presentation, something she always did, even without receiving credit. This time, she took a deep breath and said, "I can help, but only within my working hours, and if it's recognized as part of my job." He raised his eyebrows as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. "You've never complained before." "That's right," she replied calmly. "Before, I didn't know my worth." The phrase echoed through the room and the boss simply looked away. Deep down, he knew she was right. That same day, while leaving for lunch, Marina ran into Julia, a colleague who always seemed to have everything under control. But, to her surprise, Julia pulled her aside and said, "I admire you, you know. I've never had the courage to speak my mind. I've always accepted everything in silence." Marina smiled. "It's difficult at first, but when you take a stand, you realize that the fear of displeasing others was greater than the actual danger." The two went to lunch together, and for the first time, Marina felt that perhaps her change would inspire other people as well. But the path to self-knowledge is never linear. When you start to value yourself, the universe seems to test you. to see if it's real or just pretty talk. The following week, the boss announced a restructuring of positions. Marina lost some of the functions she performed, the most strategic ones, and was left with only the basics. On the outside, she feigned calm. On the inside, she felt the blow. They're cutting me down because I'm no longer submissive, she thought. That night at home, she confided in her mother. I think I made a mistake, Mom. Maybe I should have continued as before. The mother, a simple but wise woman, replied, Daughter, when you stand up for yourself, those who took advantage of you will try to push you back down. That's the price of freedom. Those words left a mark, and Marina understood. It wasn't punishment. It was a test. So he decided to stand firm. She began documenting her own projects, updating her portfolio and exploring new areas. He began to see beyond the scope of his position. If they think they can diminish me, they'll find out that you can't diminish someone who has learned to grow from within. And that's when the opportunities started to appear. A former college classmate invited her to participate in a volunteer social marketing project. Something small, but one that rekindled the sparkle in her eyes. There, Marina found a completely different environment. People who valued ideas, recognized efforts, and, above all, supported each other. One day, while presenting a proposal, the project coordinator said, You have natural leadership skills. Have you considered coordinating the next phase? Marina was speechless for a few seconds. No one had called her a leader in years, and at that moment, she realized how accustomed she had become to seeing herself as less than she actually was. He accepted the challenge, and at the end of her first meeting as coordinator, she left with a smile that hadn't graced her face in a long time. But the universe still had one more lesson in store. A few weeks later, he received a call from his former boss. The company was facing difficulties and needed someone experienced to lead a new area, exactly the kind of role it had always dreamed of having. He was direct. Marina, we need you. Nobody understands this part as well as you do. We want you to come back. She remained silent for a few seconds. In the old days, I would have accepted immediately, but now her silence wasn't indecision. It was power. I appreciate the invitation, she replied, but I'm at a different point in my life now. Today, I'll only return to a place where I'm recognized as a priority, not as an option. On the other end of the line, silence. And then, a simple, I understand. She hung up the phone, her heart racing, not from anger but from a sense of liberation. He no longer needed to prove anything to anyone. That night, she sat on the porch, looked at the sky, and smiled. There was no material gain, nor applause, but there was peace. And sometimes, peace is the first sign that you are finally where you should be. In the following months, Marina's life changed quietly but profoundly. Without the burden of trying to please everyone, she began to live more lightly. Mornings were no longer a race against the clock. They were a choice. She would calmly choose her coffee, put on some good music, and leave the house without the knot in her stomach that used to haunt her. The social project I was working on began to grow. Her ideas began to be cited, debated, and improved upon, and that made her feel alive again. It was as if she had finally returned to occupy the space that had always been hers, but which, out of fear, she had left empty. One day, during a lecture on female leadership, Marina was invited to share her story. She took a deep breath before going on stage, her hands sweating and her heart racing. But when she started talking, something magical happened. Each word came out with truth, with soul, with scars and healing mixed together. For a long time, I thought my worth depended on how useful I was to others. But true value lies not in being irreplaceable to someone. It lies in not replacing yourself to fit into places that diminish you. The audience fell silent. Some people were crying. Others looked at her with the same sparkle in their eyes that she herself was rediscovering within. At that moment, Marina understood that what she had experienced had not been in vain. Everything that seemed like a loss was actually building the woman she needed to become. After the lecture, several people approached to express their gratitude. You told my story. I needed to hear that. Today, I decided to choose myself, and each of those phrases was like an invisible hug, a confirmation that her pain had been transformed into purpose. But like any journey of growth, it also brought a challenge, choosing between the safe and the uncertain. Few months later, The coordinator of the social project received an invitation to expand the initiative into an international NGO, and he wanted Marina to go along as director of communications. It was the chance of a lifetime for her, but it meant leaving everything behind. Her city, her routine, her comfort zone. She spent days reflecting. Fear whispered again. What if you can't handle it? What if no one there recognizes your worth? What if everything you've built here is lost? But then she remembered the old version of herself, the one who said yes to everything for fear of being forgotten. I didn't want to live like this anymore. On a rainy night, he picked up his cell phone and called the coordinator. I accept. I want to go. The next day, she tidied her office desk, put her belongings in a small box, and looked around. That room, which had once been synonymous with exhaustion, now seemed too small for the woman she had become. Before leaving, she left a note stuck to the wall. Not for others, but for herself. Never settle for less than you deserve. The world will always try to convince you that you're more than enough. Keep being so. When he arrived in the new city, everything seemed frightening. New people, different culture, pressure for results. But instead of doubting herself, she relied on the conviction she had learned. Her worth did not depend on the opinions of others. It was an internal matter, non-negotiable. The first few days were tough. She made mistakes, received criticism, and thought about giving up. But this time, instead of hiding, she stood up and learned. She understood that making mistakes didn't diminish her worth. It was part of the process of growing up. One morning, after a tense meeting, the director of the NGO called her in and said, "Marina, I want you to know that you brought something rare to this team. Authenticity. People trust you because you are real." She swallowed the lump in her throat. How many times in the past has being real seemed like a flaw? And now, that was precisely what made her stand out. That night, she walked down the street feeling the cold wind on her face and thought, everything changed because I changed the way I see myself. The world didn't become more just. People didn't become kinder, but she became stronger. And when you learn your worth, no one can convince you that you're worth less. Time passed. A year later, Marina was already one of the most respected voices within the NGO. She coordinated campaigns that impacted thousands of people, saw her name in international reports, and felt proud of the path she had taken. But as life loves to test how much we've truly learned, the test came, and it came in a big way. One Tuesday morning, she received an email from a multinational company. The subject was straightforward: Global Communication Leadership Proposal. Her former employer had recommended her, and now her new company wanted to hire her for a high-paying position with international travel and visibility. For a few minutes, Marina's heart raced. It was everything she had ever wanted: the recognition, the status, the "you did it" feeling. But as he read the details, he realized an old ghost disguised as something new. The demands were absurd. Long hours, total availability, almost unattainable goals, constant pressure. In return, they promised status bonuses and opportunities for growth. Pretty words to mask an old pattern, the same one that once exhausted her. That night, Marina stared at the open email on the screen. The cursor blinked as if asking, "Are you going to accept?" My mind said yes. It was logical, it was safe, it was prestigious. But her heart remembered everything it had cost to get there. Nights of crying, a feeling of invisibility, the loss of her own essence. The next day, he decided to talk to the director of the NGO, who became a friend and mentor. "This proposal is incredible," she said, "but I'm afraid I might be going back into the same cycle." He replied calmly, "Marina, knowing your worth isn't about rejecting opportunities. It's about choosing those that don't devalue you. The difference is subtle, but profound." That phrase hit hard. It wasn't about money. It was about peace. And for the first time, she realized she could refuse without guilt. Even so, I wanted to think about it more. She went for a walk on the beach, the wind tousling her hair, her head buzzing with thoughts. He remembered how many times he had sought approval, from his boss, his colleagues, even his family. And now that he had finally gained recognition, the universe was asking, "Do you still need this to feel good enough?" She stopped, looked at the horizon, and murmured to herself, "No, I am already enough." The next day he replied to the email, "I deeply appreciate the proposal, but at this point in my life I prioritize projects that have a purpose aligned with my values. I wish everyone success." clicked on to send and felt an almost physical relief, as if he had returned to the world a weight it had been carrying for years. A few days later, the NGO director entered his office with a discreet smile. "I heard you turned down a tempting offer." "Yes," she replied. "It wasn't easy, but it was right." He nodded. "That's how we know we've grown, when we don't trade peace for prestige." That night, Marina arrived home, made a simple dinner, and put on an old song, one she used to listen to back when she still had little self-confidence. But now, the lyrics had a different meaning. Each verse seemed to speak of her, of the woman who rose from her own ashes. She wrote in her diary, "Life tested me, and I chose myself. I didn't need to shout or prove anything. I just needed to remember what I learned. No one can replace me in the role of being me." In the following days, something curious happened. The story of the refusal spread among colleagues. Some thought it was madness, others, courage. But one thing was certain: respect had increased. People began to consult her for decisions, to ask for advice, and to listen attentively to her opinions. Marina realized that when you respect yourself, the world learns to do the same. And without realizing it, she had become the living embodiment of the message she once needed to hear. One day, a young intern approached me with tears in her eyes and said, "I heard what you did, and I think I'll also refuse an offer. They offered me a great contract, but the environment is bad for me. You showed me that it's possible to choose differently." Marina hugged the girl and replied, "You never lose when you choose self-love. It might hurt now, but it will save you later." And at that moment, he understood something profound. The true power of knowing one's own worth does not lie in being admired, but also to inspire others to recognize themselves. At the end of the month, she was invited to participate in a panel discussion on purpose and authenticity at work. When he went up on stage, he looked at the audience and smiled. "I am living proof that when we choose ourselves, the world reorganizes itself around us. You won't always be applauded, but you'll always be at peace. And ultimately, that's what matters." Applause echoed, but this time she didn't need it. True recognition was already within her, silent, serene, unwavering. Months later, Marina was in a new phase of her life. It wasn't about status or external achievements. It was about fulfillment. She woke up every day with a clear purpose: to live truthfully. And that, in itself, was revolutionary. The NGO where I used to work coordinated projects in several countries. Marina traveled frequently, gave lectures, and trained teams. But, unlike in the past, she now knew her limits. He didn't let work steal his time with his family, nor his health. He had learned to say no without guilt and to celebrate his small victories without needing applause. On a quiet afternoon while reviewing a report, she received an email from Julia, that former office colleague who had once praised her for having the courage to change. The subject line read, "Thank you for showing me the way." The message was short, but full of emotion. "After you left the company, I started to see myself differently. I quit my job, started my own business, and for the first time, I feel like I'm living by choice, not by obligation. You've inspired me more than you can imagine." Marina stood still for a while, reading and rereading those words. Tears rolled down her cheeks discreetly. It wasn't pride, it was gratitude. Her transformation had multiplied, and then she understood something essential. When you discover your own worth, you don't just change your life, you change the environment around you. You become a mirror, and when people see you, they remember that they too can shine. That night, during a dinner with friends from the NGO, someone asked, "Marina, if you could go back in time and give advice to that version of yourself who silently accepted everything, what would you say?" She thought for a moment, looked at the glass of water in her hands and replied, "I would say, don't beg to be seen. Shine even if no one is watching, because whoever needs to diminish themselves to fit in somewhere is in the wrong place." The silence that followed was one of respect. Everyone felt the power of those words. Simple, yet filled with lived truth. In the following days, Marina began writing a book. He called it Irreplaceable, The Power of Knowing Who You Are. "I didn't want fame. I wanted to record what I learned, to leave a legacy." Each chapter contained fragments of pain, courage, and rebirth. And without realizing it, that book became a reflection of her own healing process. While writing, she reread pages from her old diary. the one she wrote in the early hours of the morning when she doubted herself. While flipping through the pages, she found a phrase that made her smile. "One day, I will understand why I had to go through all of this." Now she understood. He needed to lose to learn what he should never give away, his own worth. A few months later, the book was self-published. Nothing grandiose, but authentic. And to her surprise, it started to go viral on social media. People from different countries shared excerpts, sending messages saying that her words had changed something in them. Marina realized that when you speak the truth, you don't need strategies. The heart finds the way. In one of those messages, a woman wrote, "I was on the verge of giving up my job and giving up on myself. Your book reminded me that I am not disposable, that I can start over." Marina read that and cried, not out of sadness but out of accomplishment. The girl who once felt invisible was now a beacon for others walking in the dark. One day, sitting in an airport, ready to embark on yet another trip, she looked out the window and reflected, "Life is a sequence of departures and arrivals, and the greatest destination we can reach is the reunion with who we truly are." She opened her phone, went on social media, and wrote a simple text: "Don't let the world define your worth. What is rare doesn't beg for attention, it simply exists. And if one day they make you believe that it's easy to replace you, smile, because no one can take the place of someone who is whole." The post went viral, thousands of shares, comments, and messages. But the most beautiful thing is that she no longer needed anyone's validation. It was just confirmation that I was on the right track. On that same flight, as the plane took off, she closed her eyes and remembered everything. The exhausting days, the tears hidden in the company bathroom, the anger, the fear, the awakening, the courage. And he thought, all of this has brought me here. I am living proof that when we learn to choose ourselves, life changes course. Up there, above the clouds, she smiled. There was no audience, no applause, but there was peace. And that was the victory he had always sought. As the plane began its descent, she wrote the last sentence of the book: "The power of knowing your worth doesn't lie in being better than anyone else, but in never again accepting being less than you were born to be." And with that, he closed his notebook, rested his head back on the seat, and let the sun illuminate his face. Finally, she was where she had always wanted to be, within her own truth. If this story touched you, remember, your worth doesn't depend on anyone's approval. Subscribe to the channel, because here every story is a reminder that you are stronger, more capable, and far more valuable than you imagine. Turn on notifications so you don't miss the next stories, and share this video with someone who needs a reminder of their own worth today.